Thank you very much, Peter. I'm going to skip the formal introduction because I had the pleasure of being at a lunch yesterday with Brendan when he spent time with our Women in Peace leaders. And I discovered that Brendan Nelson is a physician. After he was a physician, he became president of the Australian Medical Association. And for anybody in politics, you understand your life is easy in comparison to being the president of a medical association. Then I think he wanted a new challenge. So he entered politics, was Australia's Minister of National Defence. Apparently, that job became routine for you. So he then went on and applied to become director of Australia's War Memorial without ever having any background in a museum. So we had a great lunch in which we talked about what makes great leaders. How did we all understand these traditions, these transitions in which you could move across silos like that? So that's what I want to talk about with you, Brendan, in the time we have. But let me start first. Why Halifax? Why have you been such a consistent supporter of the Women in Peace program? What makes Halifax special for you?
Well, Janice, firstly, it's my privilege to be able to spend some time with you, let alone have a conversation with you, and to further add to what I've done, which gives context. For 4 years, I was Australia's Minister for Education, which, as Thomas Jefferson said, is the defence of the nation, and represented my country at NATO and the European Union for 3 years. The Boeing company is very committed to the Halifax International Security Forum. The reason for that is because context is everything, absolutely everything. And I often say to young people, don't fall into the trap of seeing the world through a straw. You need to be interested in and interesting to the world. And the Halifax International Security Forum, in my view, in our company's view, gives us an opportunity to be exposed to diverse opinions and views, to be informed about the most consequential geopolitical realignment that is occurring in our lifetime, the dimensions of this, particularly for countries that are democracies. One of the paradoxes of life that you observe is that people have a tendency to take for granted those things that are most important to them. As an Australian, I live in a country of political, economic and religious freedoms where faith coexists with reason, free academic inquiry, a free press, an independent judiciary, as do people who've come here from those countries. That's not to suggest that our system we regard as superior to any other, but it's certainly the value system that drives us. And I must say, for the Boeing company, it's a very proud parent company. It's an American company. It's very, very important for us to support dialogue.
You made a comment to us that the world is going through the most significant geopolitical transition that it has experienced in the last 75 years.
Yeah.
Tell me how all the different careers you've had help you understand that transition.
Well, there are people in this audience that have forgotten more about this than I will ever know. But the world in which you and I have grown up and lived has gone. It's never going to come back. And in my view, in reflecting on it, the humankind is going through a major transformation. Paul Kennedy, the Richard Dilworth Professor of History at Yale, made the observation over a decade ago that after major cataclysms like the Napoleonic Wars or the Second World War, you can see the world's changed, it's obvious, and it's never going to be the same again. But when you think about the late 15th century, over 4 decades, just look at what happened as humankind went through that major transition of formation of nation states, the expansion of Europe into the Asias and North America, the Gutenberg telecommunications revolution, all of these and other changes over 4 decades. A person, as Paul Kennedy said, who lived in 1480, would not have recognised the world of 1520.
Right.
Just think back Peter MacKay and I were defence ministers at about the same time. And I think back to the challenges we were dealing with in the 2000s compared to what we deal with now. So you made the observation yesterday, it's a world of disorder. Henry Kissinger marked his 100th birthday with an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and he described this as a world of disorder. He said that nation states have lost their internal orientation. The United States, he said, has lost belief in its historical ambitions and confidence in its institutions. That's what he has said. And as you look at the world, the Sino-American relationship, as Kissinger said, is riven the world. It's taking us to a world we've not lived in since the Franco-Prussian War or the Qing dynasty. We've had Russia invade a sovereign nation, something that we thought we'd left behind at the end of the Second World War. And then a fractious, polarised US political class, which itself creates significant challenges in a great American democracy. A major energy transition that's underfoot, an existential environmental challenge in the form of climate change, a major energy transition that's having an impact not just on our world but contributing to a complex operating environment. And then, of course, where we thought were reaching a much more stable situation in the Middle East, then these heinous, barbarous attack on Israeli civilians by Hamas on the 7th of October and the unfolding tragedy that's come from it. So I think the privilege that I had in coming from the medical profession, and one of the Women Peace Fellows is herself a physician, is it gives you an understanding of people. And one of the key things in life, gratuitous advice to young people, is knowing what people think is important, but understanding how they think is much more important. And what the Halifax International Security Forum gives us is an opportunity to get a sense of how people are actually thinking, what's forming their worldview and shaping the way they see the world.
By the way, you're looking at me, so you can see the huge smiles that spread across the faces of the Women in Peace Fellows. And they all looked around to the woman leader who's a physician and smiles.
Well, we're going to, by the way, we're going to support the further initiatives in the Women Peace Fellows.
That's a wonderful announcement, which we haven't made, but you just put it on the table. With your leadership, we will be able to bring back next year to the forum all the women alumni from the Women in Peace Fellowship next year.
Well,
we want to thank you very much.
No, we thank you. And it's interesting that we're very committed as a company to diversity and inclusion. It's critically important that we have people have different backgrounds, see the world differently, think differently. You have to have a mind that's open to the unfamiliar as much as new innovative ideas and technology. But people will often argue we need more women in leadership and positions, and we certainly do. But less often, other than a 50-50 gender mix, do people put an argument. In my experience, women bring a heightened sensitivity to the needs of the future and to think about the future. For a lot of my colleagues, when I talk about vision, which differentiates leadership from management, their eyes often glaze over. But women more so get it. And that is one of the reasons why I think your initiative with the Women Peace Fellows is important and be supported.
Well, thank you again. You know, it's interesting, as we were listening to Penny Pritzker speak earlier, and she said, look, there's the double helix, right?
Yeah.
There is security, but you don't have security unless you have prosperity, but you don't have prosperity unless you have security. Looking back at what you have done, let's add a third one, which is education. Yeah. You've been Minister of Education, and that is so intimately tied up with a deeper understanding of national security and prosperity. Tell us why, I think it would interest everybody in the room, why your last career transition before Google was to take on the Australian War Museum?
I love Google, but I'm Boeing.
Well, sorry, Boeing, yes.
No.
Yeah, you're right, you're Boeing.
I'm happy to take on a few things, but I wouldn't want to take...
You're Boeing.
Yeah. It's interesting. I had been in... I say this to the young people, everyone's young at my age, but to the 15-year-olds that have been a part of this program, and Maxine from New Zealand yesterday said of all of the things she'd done in the program, the time with those 15-year-olds was the most consequential for her. But I say this to young people, you've only got one life. You've only got one chance to use it in a way which makes a difference to the lives of others. I had been in Brussels for 2 years. We were in a NATO-led war. We had no real relationship with NATO. My job was to get us to the table. We managed to achieve that, to change the relationship with the European Union. 2 years into the job, the Prime Minister asked me if I'd do an extra year, 4 years instead of 3. And I just said, look, if I do 4 years, I'll just be doing the 3rd year again. It'll be time to go home. And it was the time that I spent in the cemeteries in Flanders that actually meant much more to me than the heads of state and the ambassadors and all the excellencies and things you deal with. And so I found out quite by accident that the director's job at the Australian War Memorial in Canberra was available. As soon as I found out, I applied for it. And I went to an interview and in fact, one of the interviewers asked me if I knew much about museums. I said, well, I've visited a few. And he asked me if I'd ever run one. And I said, no, of course not, you know that. And he said, well, why on earth would we appoint someone like you to run this preeminent museum and memorial? And I said, well, if you're looking for an expert, my advice firstly is not to. But I've learned something about experts as they have a tendency, as I said earlier, to see the world through a straw. And the key task in leadership of these institutions is to apply intellectual rigour to the process of exercising judgment. And you draw on all the expertise that you have inside and outside of it. When I got the job, several people said to me, you're going to run a museum? You're going to run the Australian War Memorial? One person said to me, you're wasting your life. You've got more to do for our country than rearrange its history. And I said to them, well, it's actually got much more to do with the future than it does the past. A sense of history is absolutely vital to any understanding of the future.
Yeah.
History is the reminder that hard decisions have to be made and the consequences of making them and of not making them. History can also demolish prejudice. It also has the capacity to inspire people, particularly leaders facing new, emerging and increasingly hostile horizons. So I go to Washington, DC a lot. I've probably been there 50 or 60 times in my professional life. My staff will tell you I always go to 2 places. Even if it's just for 10 minutes. I go to the Holocaust Museum to remind me of the depths to which human beings are capable of descending in certain circumstances, even those that are educated. And then I go to the Jefferson Memorial to remind me of Thomas Jefferson's still unfulfilled promissory constitutional note, not just to Americans, but to those of us who come from and believe in liberal democracies. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
So how lucky are we to have not only Boeing, but you as global CEO, as a supporter of the forum. I think the message that you've given us all, which aligns so much with the spirit of the forum, is that we learn from each other by moving out of our silos. And so we have in the room women, 15-year-olds, private sector leaders, military leaders, ministers, senior civil servants. In fact, it's exactly that. It's not seeing the world through a straw.
I'd just say finally, Janice, particularly to young people, always... I don't know what that was, but I'd just say to young people, the most fragile yet powerful of human emotions is hope, paradoxically. We all have to believe that tomorrow is going to be better than today, that next year is going to be better than this year. And there's a lot in the world about which to be concerned, and we're discussing it here. And what most sustains it is men and women who reach out and support one another, even in the face of their own adversities. And Kenneth Clark, who did that stunning series on civilizations in the 60s, at the very end, he concluded his analysis of civilization from its origins through to the mid-20th century And he said that no matter how fragile society may be, it is lack of confidence more than anything else that destroys a civilization. We can destroy ourselves with cynicism and disillusionment just as effectively as by bombs. And that in particular, is a message that I think we need to disseminate.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you next year in Halifax.
You will,
Safe
Janice.
travels.
That's if Boeing keeps me on. They might be in trouble after all this.
We'll see you anyway.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.